Good afternoon. Feel free to come up front. I'm not going to splash you or anything. But so I'm going to start this presentation with kind of a shocking admission in context. I am a Gen AI skeptic. I think we see these amazing things. I can generate funny pictures of people with 7 fingers and sort of all of these things. But I work in cloud security. I work for Orca Security. We'll talk about it in a minute. We're a cloud security platform, and I watch what's been happening in the industry, and I see a lot of uses that aren't particularly efficient. They don't help security teams do more. They don't help them do it better. They just it's just a buzzword. It's a great way to market it. So Orca, we've done some things that I think really set a bar, and I wanted to talk about what it means to use Gen AI in a way that helps security teams, and presumably anybody else, but cloud security is what I do, that's my focus, how we get more efficient and how we use this in a way that really matches the capabilities of Gen AI, what it does well. And so first, I wanted to talk for a minute about Orca Security. If you want to hear more, our booth is way over on row 800 on the other side of things there. We are happy to talk about it. But generally speaking, we are a cloud security platform for IaaS and PaaS, for the things you're running in AWS, and potentially other cloud services. But for today, we'll talk about AWS. This covers posture management. What have I deployed to the cloud? How is it configured? So I've got S3 buckets, I've got EC2 instances, I've got networks and all of these things. Getting an asset inventory of all of those things and understanding where they are. It involves the unfortunately named Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. If you're not familiar with that Gartner acronym, that's all about identity and IAM, right? It's about who has access to what access do they have. This is one of those problems I feel like is no longer a human scale problem. It's so large, anybody who tells me they understand IAM, I figure they're making it up, because it's just massively complex, but we help break that down. Workload protection, so I've got a bunch of EC2 instances, I've got a bunch of EKS clusters, I've got containers running. What's in them? What's vulnerable? What's misconfigured in those workloads? Getting that view. Kubernetes security posture management, so specifically my EKS clusters, and maybe I'm running some self-managed clusters or whatever they are. What have I configured there? What have I misconfigured there? Shift left security, AppSec. How do I take all of these things and move them into where my developers are working and building? Try to fix problems before they get into production. Data security. What is the data I have out there? Where do I have PII? Where do I have credit cards? Where do I have email addresses? Where do I have PHI? Protected healthcare information if you're not in that field. Identifying all that data, where is it accessible? What does it do? And I'm just going off the slide. There's so many things in the platform, I sometimes forget everything we do, but cloud detection and response. So the idea here being, how do we find if something goes wrong in our cloud environment? How do we find that there's an attack or a threat, something that is happening? API security, what have we exposed? What are the risks there? All of these things. Orca rolls into all of these things, and I think I'm missing some from these slides, but the idea is we're getting a comprehensive view of cloud security across what I've deployed in AWS, what I'm running. From the top to the bottom. What have I created? How's it configured? What's in my workloads? What's vulnerable, et cetera. So that's a lot of stuff, right? And it turns out, it is a lot of stuff. And this is, we talk a lot in Orca about how we help solve these problems with contextual prioritization and sort of all of these things. It turns out sometimes that's not even enough. There just are not enough cloud security people in the world to handle all the cloud security problems that are out there. Or at least that's what CISOs and VPs of security I talk to tell me. I love this number, 59% of security teams receive more than 500 alerts a day. I'm actually shocked that it's that low, right? Like I see thousands and thousands of alerts being generated. And more than half of security teams admit to missing critical alerts daily or weekly. The other 41% just don't admit it, but they almost certainly are. This is an area where we've got to get better, and it turns out generative AI is one of the things that does help me get better. And so from an Orca perspective, one of our 3 key pillars when we build our roadmap is how do we make teams more efficient? How do we help security teams, DevOps teams, auditors, regulators, everybody that uses the platform get better at it, make more use of what they have? And one of those answers, by the way, so this is what our inventory looks like. We also have something called discovery. We're getting an inventory of everything you've deployed in the cloud. And it turns out, if you're even a kind of a mid-sized cloud customer, this is massive. This is tens and hundreds of thousands of objects. Everything from every VM you have deployed, every container you have running, every sort of firewall rule you have to allow access to things, and load balancers and identities and all of those things. Now, if I'm an analyst who's in the platform every day, I get used to this very quickly. I know where to go, how to find what I'm looking for, and I get a feel for it, I understand what I'm looking at. But we have a lot of stakeholders who are not in there every day. We have a lot of stakeholders who are maybe a DevOps engineer who's trying to solve one problem, they need more data. We have somebody who's in GRC doing compliance, who's looking at an audit, they've got this report, but they need to go trust but verify and go through and look at the findings. They've got to come in here and look at things. We have lots of stakeholders who aren't in here every day. And so we built out natural language search. Nothing massively innovative about that, right? Everybody's doing that. But I think there's a couple of interesting things about what we did. First of all, it works really well. So, I can look at this. This is, I'm not supposed to step in front of this, so I'll just point from the side here. But this is what a query would look like if I was building it myself. I'm looking for a virtual machine with sensitive data, so it has credit cards or social security numbers or something. And it's exposed to the it's public facing, it's internet facing, whatever it is. Now, normally I would have to build this, but instead what I've done is just asked which VMs have sensitive data and are exposed on the internet. And Orca said, oh, here's what that query looks like, and I have 153 results that now I can get to what I want to do. Now, what I do think is really interesting about this, we get a lot of questions. Every time I show this to somebody, they're like, well, what about data security? What about my data? What are you doing with my data? It's the first question you should ask anytime somebody shows you something like this. So one thing is we tokenize it all. So we go through, my query doesn't have anything that's sensitive, but if I put a username or a machine name or whatever else in there, we replace it with a token, feed it into the LLM, come back and we replace the token with the actual name. But what I like even more about this is we didn't train this on customer data. We don't feed customer data into some sort of training model and build a model and do things. Instead, what we did is we fed our documentation into the training. So we didn't teach the LLM how to answer this question based on data. We taught it how to answer the question based on operating Orca. And so that's why it said, I put in a question and it builds out this query, which is amazing because first of all, it answers so many of those questions about what are you doing with my data? How are you managing it? We're not. We're keeping all your data. It's all safe. We're just telling the LLM how to build a query and show you what to do, which has worked incredibly well. It's one of those things like, to tell you now it sounds really simple, but it was kind of a big idea when we built it. And then you get interesting knock-on effects to that. So one of the things that we found out, we didn't realize, we built this, we put it out there, customers started working with it. It's multilingual all on its own. We had a customer in Brazil who started putting Portuguese in there. And it was like, yeah, I speak Portuguese, no problem, I can build that. And it turns out Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, Hebrew, globally we've had customers go and use this. Not just that they weren't familiar with our query language, but they're not a native English speaker, and it's still like, yep, no problem, I can get you the results. This to me is one of those things, like when I talk about making teams more efficient, this is a great example of taking the technology and using it in a way that's not exciting, it's not pictures of people with 7 fingers and sort of weird stuff, but it really enables people to deliver results and go from there. Now, another problem we have, as I'm working with security teams, I mentioned not really having enough security people to fill sort of every cloud security problem. What happens in a lot of organizations is the security people know on-prem security, they know traditional security, they know security concepts, but they don't necessarily know cloud concepts. And so it becomes, here's an alert. This is a pretty typical alert. Somebody created an S3 bucket that allows public access via bucket policies. This is how we see critical data get compromised over and over and over again. As a security person, I can understand why having a bucket with some data in it that people outside of my company can read is potentially problematic. But I probably don't know how to fix this. And in fact, I know how to fix this because I've been in cloud security for a while, but typically I would not have any idea. And this ends up being a big gulf for security companies and security teams. This is another thing I talk all the time about is, hey, okay, good, I have problems. How do I fix them? How do I remediate them? How do I communicate with developers and DevOps and cloud ops and sort of all of these other people about what needs to be done? And so we have this thing that allows me to take this alert and feed it into generative AI to build an answer for how would I do this, based on how I want to fix the problem. Maybe I want to go into the AWS console, click, 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 click. Maybe I'm more advanced than that. I've embraced the future. I'm all about that IAC. I want to solve it with CloudFormation. Or maybe I'm not a CloudFormation shop, maybe I'm a Terraform shop, or sort of whatever I want to do, I can put it in here. And what I get back is, yeah, okay, here's what this would look like. Here's what a CloudFormation template to address this would look like. Pulling in the name of the bucket and sort of all of the region, all the things I would need in there to build that. This for me, when I think about Gen AI and I think about some of the weird stuff I see that is impressive and neat but doesn't work very well, this is the opposite. This is something Gen AI is really good at doing in our experience. And it's very, very effective. I think of it as being like Stack Overflow on steroids, without that one person that every time you post something goes, you should have seen this post from 3 years ago, you suck, right? It's much more polite. But it's effectively going out and saying, all right, yeah, I've synthesized this. This is what it would look like. We know sort of what you're trying to solve for. Here's what it would look like. And then you can't see in the screenshot, but it's interactive. So if I look at this and go, well, what about this? I can just put my question in there and keep going back and forth with it until I get the answer I'm looking for. Once again, this has been incredibly empowering for security teams. It's not a huge thing, but it enables them to bridge that gap of knowing security but not knowing the cloud side, and go from there. Give me a minute. We'll have some time for questions at the end. But somebody's going to have a mic, so you. Yeah, this has been really cool and a really great use. And I mentioned it earlier, but we don't train on the customer data, and the queries themselves are tokenized, so we're protecting sensitive information when they're made. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to show you, and this is the smallest thing I'm going to show you. It's also in some ways, for me, the most impressive use of generative AI. So, in Orca, you can save views and sort of queries and typical UI stuff. And there's always been this field for a name for your query or your view or whatever it is and a description of it, which of course nobody fills in, right? They put the shortest possible name, leave the description blank, hit save, and off they are. So what we did is said, hey, you know what? We can just feed this thing into generative AI, build a name and a description and make it self-documenting. I said, now maybe it gets it wrong. Maybe there's some specific thing I actually need to put in the description that I need to go change. But instead of having almost nobody fill in those fields and having 100 queries out there that you have no idea what they're for, what they do, just somebody named them my query 1 and my query 2 and my query 3, now you've got a real name that describes it, you've got a full description, and it makes it that much easier. It's a tiny thing, and yet it's a really cool use of generative AI to build out, to make life easier, to make it more approachable and work from there.